All right, all right. Just gonna give it a few seconds here to let people join in and make sure all the tech is working, and then we're gonna get started. Lots to talk about. Let me also just tweet this out. Okay. Okay, I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and you're watching Dispatches on Breakthrough News. And I'm just going to get right to my guests because there's so much to talk about. Today, I'm joined by Mouin Rabbani, co-editor of Jadaliyya. You're going to go ahead and bring him in. Mouin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Rania, and it's great to be with you again.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, but man, the situation just keeps escalating and getting worse. And I mean, let's just get right into the latest news. We're going to talk about lots of things happening around the region, but I mean, I'm sure you woke up to it this morning. Most of our audience is in the U.S. and probably woke up to it as well. We know that Trump has this ultimatum that he's been talking about, where he's saying that unless Iran capitulates to his demand and opens or reopens the Strait of Hormuz, he will begin destroying the country's civilian infrastructure, including power plants and bridges. Talking about 8 p.m. on Tuesday night Eastern time. But then, this morning he came out with this wild statement. I'm just going to go ahead and put it up on screen. I'm sure most people have seen it, but for those who will be just listening to this episode, I'm going to go ahead and read it. He says, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran." I mean, there's a lot happening there. But all that's to say, if Trump follows through on his threats, Iran has made it clear it will escalate in kind, hitting similar infrastructure in the Gulf states, potentially even Israel. But we do know that the Gulf states will literally go up in flames if the U.S. does this. So I guess, Mouin, what is your reaction to this shockingly criminal and genocidal threat we see this morning?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was that when a musician chanted "Death to the IDF" at a music festival in Britain, that was denounced as a genocidal statement. When people chant "Death to America" or "Death to Israel," that's seen as a statement of intent and explicitly genocidal. But now that the U.S. leader is explicitly stating his intention to end an entire civilization at a specific point in time, after he has already been bombing that country and its infrastructure for over a month, people are making excuses for him. He ends his deranged tweet with "God bless the great people of Iran." And so people are saying, you see, he's actually talking about saving the Iranian people from their government and from the Islamic Republic. And of course, Netanyahu, who, as you know, is already under indictment for war crimes and crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court in Dahieh, also came out and said, no, actually, this is a threat against the regime and not the state or the society or the people. We're living in Alice in Wonderland, really. As for the statement itself, I think obviously we can't ignore what the leader of the United States says, but I think rather than having this debate about whether to take him seriously or literally or comically or whatever, I think we really should focus on what the United States is doing rather than what its leadership says. And there are genuine fears that this threat means that the U.S. and or Israel is either preparing to drop a nuclear weapon on Iran or cause a Chernobyl-like radiological catastrophe by bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. I think either of those are plausible but unlikely. What I think is more likely, if Trump doesn't this evening again respond to this ultimatum by extending it for another week or two, is that we're likely to see intensive bombing of Iranian civilian infrastructure to the extent that the remaining US and Israeli capabilities would allow for such a systematic campaign. And I think just as likely, an attempt to seize Iranian territory. But again, that's speculative, because when you're dealing with a mad king, you have to factor in any possibility and its opposite as being equally likely.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, like, of course, it's a very scary threat because he's basically threatening annihilation. I mean, when you say a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, that is a genocidal threat to a country of 90 million people, more than 90 million people.
Yes.
And it is quite Israeli. I mean, I think I saw somebody joke on Twitter, this is what happens when you press the translate Hebrew function on a tweet from Israel. But in all seriousness, it's also very madman, like Nixon style, right? Like when you think about during Vietnam and Nixon really wanting to push the idea towards his enemies that, yes, I'm willing to use a nuke on you. I mean, I'm hoping it's bluster, but I agree with you. We're likely going to see a massive escalation against Iranian infrastructure, as has been promised. Yeah, go ahead.
Interrupt you, Rania, because I think there's an important distinction. The madman theory, as I understand it, as developed during the Nixon administration, was basically a warning to the Soviet Union that, you know, if you launch a land invasion, a conventional land invasion of Western Europe, we are prepared to use nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. So whatever you may think of that, it was specifically intended to deter an adversary from a certain course of action. This is very different. This is basically telling the Iranians, you either submit, you either deliver your unconditional surrender. If you do not capitulate to all of our demands by 8 p.m. tonight as a result of an unprovoked war of aggression we and the Israelis launched against you on the 28th of February, then we are going to annihilate you. We're going to literally end you as a civilization. So this is the purpose here is not deterrence by any stretch of the imagination.
No, that's a really good point. This is completely offensive in the most aggressive and criminal way. And I actually wanted to ask you, I know international law doesn't seem to really matter anymore. I mean, the Israelis and Americans have spent the last 2+ years destroying it in the ruins of Gaza. But, even just the threat itself, does that constitute a war crime? I mean, is it, even if he doesn't carry it out, let's say he in an hour says, okay, guys, it's all good. This war is over. Just the mere fact that you have the president saying this publicly, please go ahead.
Well, I'm not an international lawyer, but my understanding, and others can check this, is that an explicit threat of mass extermination constitutes a crime under the Rome Statute, which governs the International Criminal Court. And regarding the ICC, I just like to make an additional point that, as people have correctly noted, neither the United States nor Iran are signatories to the Rome Statute. And therefore, generally, crimes, war crimes, or any other crimes on Iranian territory or by the US or Iran can't be adjudicated by the ICC. But that's not entirely correct, because there are two additional mechanisms through which the ICC can take up a case. The first would be a referral to the ICC Office of the Prosecutor by the United Nations Security Council. That's clearly not going to happen here because of the US veto. But the prosecutor can also initiate proceedings by seeking permission from a panel of ICC judges. And if they were to give that, then despite neither the United States nor Iran being ICC members, and despite the absence of a UN Security Council referral, the ICC could still investigate this. Of course, it's not going to, It is already under fierce attack, and its prosecutor, Karim Khan, has proven himself to be very accommodating of the United States, to the extent that he's been able to do so since he assumed office.
No, that's a very, very important point to raise. And I did want to ask you, because this is something that you've written about. And I know, like, we can sit here and speculate about the different outcomes for tomorrow, for me, it's middle of the night my time tomorrow, but I guess it's tonight for those of you on the east coast of the U.S. But this is not the first ultimatum that Trump has given. He has floated everything from, forcing the Strait of Hormuz open militarily, to seizing territory, specifically Karg Island, to a ground invasion, to taking the oil. And you wrote in one of your Substack posts that hubristic fever dreams have a way of being overtaken by reality. And so I'm curious if you can maybe elaborate on that in this current context. What reality has the Trump administration run up against? I mean, I think some of that reality is the reason we're seeing increasingly genocidal rhetoric from him.
Well, the reality here is that the United States and Israel launched this war, the unprovoked war of aggression, with the explicit purpose of regime change in Tehran. They were very open about this at the beginning. Now, of course, they're saying that was never on the agenda. Well, Trump is saying it's already been achieved, but it was never on the agenda. And if you also place this in the broader context of the war launched by Israel, later the United States, against Iran in June of last year, the Iranians have concluded that this is a matter of existence, that this is an existential conflict for them. In other words, that they cannot accept a ceasefire that does not lead to a permanent end of aggression against them, and that they need to be prepared to absorb very significant pain and damage in order to survive. Now, of course, militarily, Iran cannot compete with either the United States or Israel, let alone both of them. But it does have very significant leverage. It is not only is it not militarily powerless, it also has a set of regional alliances, but more importantly, it has an absolutely crucial strategic geographical position, because it sits astride the Strait of Hormuz, and that allows it to control approximately 20% of the global energy trade. And just as importantly, it's not only oil and natural gas that flow through these straits, it's also a whole bunch of byproducts that are necessary for fertilizers, for plastics, for so on. In some cases, it's the raw materials that originate in the Persian Gulf region. In other cases, it's the actual products. So what Iran has very successfully been able to do is to transform a war between it on the one hand and the US and Israel on the other into a regional crisis. You spoke about its attacks on states on the Arab coast of the Persian Gulf. But arguably more importantly, it's been able to transform this into a global economic crisis, the effects of which are beginning to be felt and which will continue to escalate even if the war ends. As we are speaking, we are seeing now a cascading series of events, and specifically with respect to the issues that we've been discussing. If the US and Israel follow through on their threat to seek to wipe out Iranian civilian and industrial infrastructure, something that they've already started doing, by the way, the Iranians have threatened that they will retaliate by also seeking to eliminate the power grid, desalination plants, and infrastructure in not only Israel, but also the Arab states sitting astride the Persian Gulf. Now, the difference is that if you look at some of these smaller states, on the Persian Gulf. They are entirely dependent on that infrastructure for their electricity, of course, but also for their water and other things. And they could become, at the very least, temporarily uninhabitable, particularly now as we go into spring and summer. I mean, if they don't have water and electricity, it's going to be an absolute catastrophe for them. The problem here is that the US, which I remain convinced launched this war without the participation or collusion of these states. In other words, it did so without consulting them and did so solely in close coordination with Israel, is now putting their very existence on the line, basically for the greater glory of Israel and the dominance of the US over the Middle East.
Yeah, it's utterly shocking why anybody would want to be allied with this country after being used as cannon fodder like this. But you're still seeing from some of them. I mean, specifically, I'm thinking of like the Emiratis and the Bahrainis are still really glued to the idea of doing, of being in the American orbit to the point where they're like threatening to join the fight directly, which is just completely insane because of how vulnerable they are. But I want to ask you about a different aspect of this. And, what do you make of, call me naive. Maybe I'm naive. I'm willing to concede that I am. It is still shocking for me, despite what I know about the Europeans and the rest of the world, really. And I kind of throw the Democratic Party into this like bunch.
The
How
what
all
party?
of these, the Democrat, I'm sorry, what party is that? I don't know what this party is. I haven't heard from them. No, but the silence. I mean, the only thing we've heard from the Europeans actually is condemning Iran repeatedly and saying nothing about America and Israel's war of aggression. But even more than that, I understand they're completely hypocritical, but I mean, wow, you're just watching this guy announce genocidal intent and saying nothing. And it's also like going to blow back on you. I'm just curious what you make of that level of, I don't know if it's just, cowardly silence, subservience to the US project. What do you make of that?
We've now gotten to the point where if the US or Israel were to drop a nuclear bomb on Tehran, the European Union would condemn Iran for spreading radiation in the Middle East. We've gotten to that point. I think there are several factors here. First of all, I mean, relations between Europe and the United States are not just about the Middle East. There are trade, tariffs, and so on. And many of the leaders in Europe seem to genuinely believe that if you appease Washington, if you continue to appease Trump, that there is going to be some kind of balance in the relationship. Of course, they're also more concerned about the war in Ukraine than the war in the Middle East. And they genuinely believe that if they make these kinds of statements and blame Iran for getting attacked, that Washington will then continue to support their position on Ukraine and continue to allow them to purchase weapons to deliver to the Ukrainians and so on. It's complete madness. And really the only European leader who we've seen take a clear and unambiguously firm position on this from the very outset has been the Spanish prime minister. Against that, you have, for example, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying, the US will not be allowed to use British military facilities except for defensive purposes, which happens to be a war of aggression against Iran. I mean, the Europeans are going to be hurt by this much more than the Americans. But again, they have spent years appeasing the Americans and appeasing the Israelis. They have transformed providing Israel with impunity for war crimes and genocide into an art form that it's counterintuitive to think that at this point they can somehow reverse course. Of course, we're seeing a little bit of that with France. But, when you consider that the person who is, for all intents and purposes, the foreign minister of the European Union, Kaja Kallas, I don't think I've ever come across a senior official more out of their depth than hers. Getting in front of cameras and saying with a straight face that Russia has never been invaded, for example, it's a clown show. The clown show is not only in Washington.
That's a good point. And speaking of clown shows, but scary clown shows, I wanna talk a little bit about the Israelis, because for its part, Israel's so happy, right? I think they're just like elated at the moment because this is everything they've ever wanted, and you
For the
also have
moment, yes.
for the moment, yes, and you have the Israelis also threatening. I mean, they're so excited to because they love to destroy everything around them, but you have them threatening to apply the Dahieh doctrine in Tehran in the next level of escalation. And for those who don't know, that is the Israeli military doctrine that was formulated in the southern suburbs of Beirut against what's considered, Hezbollah's popular support base, which basically calls for intentionally destroying civilian infrastructure.
Intentionally disproportionate.
Yeah, it's exactly. Overwhelming and disproportionate actually are the words that they use. Overwhelmingly and disproportionate force against civilian infrastructure to try to pressure the local population to turn against, whatever authority it is that the Israelis are trying to weaken. So in this case, that's what they would be doing in Iran. And they've talked about doing it in areas where they think there's, that are considered regime support areas, as they call them. And Trump and Netanyahu are clearly partners in this war, like you said. But there does also seem to be a slight difference in end goals, depending on what you think Trump's end goals are. I think he's not even entirely sure what they are. But that's to say, I'm just curious, how do you see the U.S.-Israeli relationship in this moment? And is there any, do you think, daylight between them? Or is that perhaps, people making more of that than it actually is?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, again, to the extent that one can read these rancid tea leaves, I think the U.S. objective is primarily one of Iranian capitulation. It wants the government in Tehran to do its bidding, whether it's this set of leaders or a different one. But as long as Iran does as it's told, the U.S. Will consider that it has achieved its objectives. The Israeli objectives go, in my view, well beyond that. This is from Israel's perspective, the objective is not capitulation or regime change, but state collapse. Iran is supposed to be essentially demilitarized by force. It needs to become defenseless, much like Syria after much of its arsenal was wiped out in December of 2024, I believe it was. And ideally, it would like to see Iran disintegrate into kind of competing fiefdoms, whether ethnic or territorial or political or whatever. That is not necessarily a U.S. interest. And more importantly, the U.S. is a global power. Israel is seeking to maintain its status as a regional power. And the U.S. will also take into consideration that genuine state collapse in Iran will affect the security and stability of other states in the region, particularly the oil-producing GCC states. Whereas from Israel's perspective, it couldn't care less about any of these global ramifications. But that's kind of talking at, let's say, a general strategic level. In the heat of the moment, there is no daylight between them. I think the more interesting scenarios develop in the coming weeks and months. It's quite clear that irrespective of how successful the US-Israeli campaign against Iran is at the end of the day, this has already been a strategic impasse for both of them. People are increasingly referring to this war as Washington's Suez moment, referring to the 1956 Suez crisis and how it ended ultimately Britain's role as a significant global power. And many people, rightly or wrongly, see this war as essentially an Israeli project in which Washington was persuaded to do Israel's bidding. Now you add all that, the potential for further escalation and U.S. losses, to say nothing about the real and impending economic ramifications and so on. Israel may well end up taking a significant portion of the blame for this war and its consequences. It already is. And with an administration like the one we have in Washington now, it won't hesitate to throw Israel under the bus and to make Israel take the blame for all Washington's actions. Now, if you put this in the context of what I consider Israel's most important strategic asset, its most important strategic achievement since its existence, which is a solid bipartisan support of U.S. political elites over the course of many decades, that's already beginning to significantly fray. And if they additionally now start losing key Republican constituencies, it's very difficult to see how Israel emerges from this, let alone emerges from it strengthened. Because for Israel, this war is ultimately about consolidating its regional hegemony for a generation. It's not even able to reach the Litani River in southern Lebanon. So just as the U.S. is coming up against the limits of its global power in the 21st century, I think Israel is coming up against the limits of its ability to impose regional hegemony. Ironically, precisely because of a war that was meant to be the final word on this issue.
That's so important, everything you just said. I mean, the idea that, you know, both the Israelis and Americans are increasingly unable to convert their ability to exact like huge destruction and to militarily escalate, unable to convert that into like a stable political outcome in their favor, is very much in keeping with the moment we're witnessing. And I think it makes them look weak, even if they can destroy. And exactly like you said, I mean, the Israelis, if we take a look at Lebanon, like you said, they're still fighting, you know, at the border villages in the south of Lebanon against this, you know, Hezbollah guerrilla force that has far inferior weapons. But they just can't get through. They make the same mistake over and over. I mean, nothing's guaranteed. You know, maybe tomorrow we'll wake up and they'll be at the Litani River, but they've been doing this for over a month now. And they still have not managed to make it further than like 3 to 5 kilometers into Lebanon. And they kind of have to, they do these incursions and they retreat. And it's similar to kind of what we've seen to some degree in Gaza as well, where they're kind of stuck in that same cycle. And with Gaza, I mean, Hamas is way less equipped than Hezbollah is. And they've been genociding Gaza for 2+ years. And still, you know, they're stuck in this loop where they just can't get the outcome they want. And now we see it happening on a way bigger scale with the Iranians. And so it stands to be seen. I want to really quickly just talk about the Iranians because I want to show what they're actually asking for. Here is the list of their latest 10-point plan of demands. And I want to show because I think these sound very reasonable. So this is in response to the U.S. 15-point, you know, so-called peace plan that was all basically complete capitulation. So Iran is asking for a guarantee that Iran will not be attacked again, a permanent end to the war, not just a ceasefire, but a permanent end, an end to Israeli strikes on Lebanon. I love that demand. Lifting of all U.S. sanctions on Iran, ending regional fighting against Iran's allies. So that would include like Hezbollah, the Ansar Allah in Yemen, the various Iraqi groups that are allied with Iran and Iraq. And Iran in return would open the Strait of Hormuz, but would impose a fee of $2 million per ship. And apparently would split these fees with Oman, which seems nice and makes sense considering Oman has played a very nice role with Iran compared to the other Gulf states. Iran would provide rules for safe passage through the Hormuz and would use the Hormuz fees for reconstruction, and that would be in place of demanding reparations. So I don't know. These to me seem like pretty reasonable demands. And I just bring that up because, you know, when we talk about the issue of people being allowed to defend themselves, a country being allowed to defend themselves. We're constantly told that Israel is, killing over 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza because they have to defend themselves. They're bombing everything around me in Lebanon because they have to defend themselves. They have to bomb Syria despite the fact that Syria's government is begging for normalization because they have to defend themselves. They have to carry out a war of aggression against Iran because they have to defend themselves. I could go on and on and on. Does Iran have a right to defend itself?
Of course not.
Does Iran have a right to exist? I'm just curious your thoughts on all that. I know I threw a bunch of things out.
I think what's happening here is that for the past several decades, the situation in the Persian Gulf has been free passage for all, unrestricted exports and imports for all, except Iran, whose oil industry is sanctioned, who is prohibited by these sanctions from basically importing anything or exporting its oil. It has to do so clandestinely and so on. And what the Iranians are now trying to do is to subject the Strait of Hormuz, which is an international waterway, but sits astride its coast, establish some kind of control, sovereignty, whatever you want to call it, similar to the Suez Canal, of course, with the distinction that the Suez Canal goes through sovereign Egyptian territory. But they're basically using their position to say, this is not only a wartime measure, here is a new situation. If and you can't do anything about it. And until you stop trying to do anything about it and accept this new situation, we're going to be able to hold the world economy by the throat. So quite clearly, the Iranian calculation is that they can inflict more pain on their adversaries than their adversaries can inflict on them. And of course, the damage that the US and Israel are causing is focused on Iran, whereas Iran's response is spread not only throughout the region, but throughout the world. And they are calculating, I suspect correctly, that they have greater perseverance and more staying power in this standoff than does the United States, for the simple reason that for them, this is an absolutely existential matter. It's a matter of existence, particularly now when you get this madman in Washington talking about ending their civilization. I mean, Iran has never so much as aimed a water pistol at the United States. So we'll see, how this develops in the coming period. And I thought it was quite intelligent to also include Oman in this, because Oman, of course, sits on the other end of the Strait of Hormuz. But we'll see how that goes. We're already seeing signs of various countries making side deals with Iran, and this is apparently, beginning to affect the so-called petrodollar and so on. And I think the Iranians have concluded that the longer this goes on, the weaker the U.S. position becomes. We'll see whether those calculations are correct in the coming weeks and months. But I suspect they are in a much better position to impose their will than many people assume, particularly the lunatics in Washington.
Yeah. And, when it comes to the way the Israelis are dealing with this, it really seems like they thought, and they still think, that they can use the Gaza model, the Lebanon model on Iran. But Iran's a different situation. It's a country with over 90 million people. It has a functioning and very resilient, as we've seen over the last month, government. So very different situation than a non-state actor, either in Palestine or in Lebanon. But I want to bring those two places into the mix, because I want to talk to you about disarmament. Because we see, with the Gaza, so-called Board of Peace, you see this demand about this kind of unilateral Palestinian disarmament of Hamas. As a genocide is still ongoing. And then the Israelis are also demanding a similar unilateral disarmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in fact, in Lebanon, they're demanding the Lebanese state, the army of Lebanon, carry out the disarmament, which would essentially, they're demanding Lebanon go to civil war, and that Lebanese kill each other if they want the Israelis to stop killing them. That's actually what the Israelis are demanding of Lebanon right now. The U.S. and Israel are both demanding that of Lebanon. And then you zoom out to Iran, and they're making these crazy demands of Iran. They're saying that Iran needs to stop manufacturing missiles and drones. Like I've heard Marco Rubio say that the Israelis want Iran to basically have no ability to protect itself whatsoever. So I do think it's interesting that no one in the region, if the Israelis are concerned, is allowed to have any meaningful military capacity unless
defenseless. No.
Yes, completely defenseless. And what little they are allowed to have basically has to answer to Tel Aviv and Washington. But they're never allowed to pose a threat to them. Is that the sort of core regional order they're trying to impose here?
Yeah, if you'll give me a few minutes, I'd like to make a few points.
Yes.
So Israel last achieved a decisive military victory in 1967 during the June War. Prior to 2025, its last armed conflict with a state, with a conventional army, was in 1973. And basically all its wars since then have been against so-called non-state actors, a PLO in Lebanon in 1982, Hezbollah in Lebanon, from 82 to 2000, and then again in 2006, Hamas and Fatah in the occupied territories, and so on. And what we've learned during this period is that the Israeli military is a very effective and very efficient killing machine, but a very mediocre fighting force. And the real strength of the Israeli military lies not so much in its military capabilities, but in the United States. And here I would recall the statement that was made by the Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, at the end of the 1973 October War, when he was asked, why he accepted a ceasefire resolution with Israel. And he said, well, I went to war against Israel and ended up fighting against the United States, reference to the massive and unprecedented airlift of US weapons to Israel. Now, Israel is a nuclear weapon state, undeclared because its nuclear arsenal is illegal. It has the most advanced and sophisticated weapons on earth. And I'm not going to say it can't even defeat Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is considered a significant fighting force. It can't even defeat Hamas in the West Bank. Its cells and so on. I mean, 2 years against the Gaza Strip, which is not mountainous terrain, which is not jungle or forest, which is basically flat urban space. And it hasn't been able to administer a decisive defeat on a poorly armed second order militia. So where does Israel's strength lie? Well, it lies in the United States. The United States, if you're an enemy or adversary of Israel, the US will use its extraordinary, enormous power in the international financial system to impose economic sanctions on you. It will impose weapons embargoes on you. It will pass resolutions at the United Nations Security Council demanding your disarmament. It will do everything within its power to ensure that you are defenseless, so that Israel can attack you at will, and so that you don't have meaningful means with which to defend yourself. And even then, Israel still can't reach the Litani River. It still can't occupy the entirety of the Gaza Strip. So, one thing we should have known, many of us did know, but that has become absolutely clear during the past years, is how extraordinarily dependent Israel is on the United States, militarily, politically, diplomatically, and so on. And I was saying this as a prelude to answering your question, but I'm not sure I've answered it because I've kind of forgotten it. So
Well, it's about the disarmament, like about the need to like basically try to use disarmament. And also, I'd also add to everything you're saying is totally on point. From the perspective of those who are being demanded to disarm, it's like, why on earth would you put down weapons against these people who slaughter you anyway? I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is the disarmament and basically removal of the PLO from Lebanon in 1982. And what did the Israelis do after that? They oversaw Sabra and Shatila, exactly, which was the massacre by Lebanese right-wing fascistic militias, with the literally
acting
with the
under
guards.
Israeli supervision.
Exactly, under Ariel Sharon's supervision, for 2 days, I think that went on for 2 days. 3 days, sorry, of just like massacres, rapes. I mean, we're talking like with machetes. Not that there's a nice way to massacre people, but just the most vile, torturous deaths imposed on basically women and children after the PLO put down their weapons and left Lebanon. So, with the examples like that, why on earth, if you're Hamas in Gaza, if you're Hezbollah in Lebanon, why on earth would you put down your weapons ever?
Well, this gets back to that Iranian counter proposal that you put up on the screen. And the Iranians have made clear they're not going to accept a ceasefire, which is basically a pause in hostilities during which the Israelis and Americans can restock their weapons and then resume. They're saying either a permanent, guaranteed, enforceable end to aggression or no ceasefire. Now, in Gaza, the situation is a little different. You'll recall that in September of last year, when Trump and Netanyahu unveiled their initiative for Gaza at the White House, at the tail end of it came this thing Trump referred to as the Board of Peace, and which he would head. And people at the time kind of mockingly dismissed it as a vanity project that was there as a kind of sweetener to get Trump involved in this issue. But then it became the centerpiece, and Gaza became an appendage of it. I call it the Board of Trump rather than the Board of Peace, because he is the permanent head of it. Its membership, its decisions, everything is subject to his personal decision and personal whims. And most recently, this board, which is now, by the way, also in an act of criminal negligence authorized by the United Nations Security Council, it has basically put forward a proposal for unilateral Palestinian disarmament in the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinians have responded that, this is disarmament concerns the second phase of a three-part deal. During the first phase, there was supposed to be a cessation of hostilities. That never happened. More than 700 Palestinians have been killed in daily attacks since this agreement went into effect on October 8th of last year. There was supposed to be a surge of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip, continues to be restricted and is now being restricted even more. The Israelis were supposed to withdraw to the so-called yellow line within the Gaza Strip, and they've actually been expanding their control. And they also didn't fulfill their commitments under the clauses of the first part of the agreement dealing with an exchange of captives. And so the Palestinians have said, we're not even going to discuss your disarmament proposal until the first phase of that agreement is properly implemented, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. But even if it is, I think the Palestinians will then say, as they've said before, that these weapons exist for a reason. And unless you address and remove the cause for the existence of these weapons, in one way or another, we're going to keep them. They've apparently been willing to hand over their heavy weaponry and so on. But for Israel, it's not just about disarmament. It's also about, imposing a visible act of surrender by their adversaries in order to give a visible demonstration of their control and will to permanent occupation and subjugation. And that's really never going to happen. And even if, Hamas fully complies with all the Israeli and U.S. demands on this. At the end of the day, it won't really make much difference because this isn't a conflict between Israel and Hamas. This is an occupation by Israel of the Palestinian people. It's a dispossession of an entire people. And if one group surrenders and capitulates and so on, another will arise in its place. That's been the case throughout Palestinian history. And this case ultimately will be no different.
Absolutely. I want to just remind our audience real quick because I forgot to. I usually yell at them occasionally throughout the show that they need to like the episode. I forgot to do that. So everybody make sure you smash the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. I did also want to say just like an interesting piece of news. I mean, you might have seen there was this UN Security Council vote that was supposed to happen today. I think it was put forward by the Bahrainis.
Yes.
Essentially to call, initially they wanted to call for Article 7, which would have given member states authorization to use force to open the Strait of Hormuz, but it was ultimately whittled down. That being said, China and Russia used their veto power, which I thought was interesting because they have been reluctant to use it before. They've kind of been abstaining in these resolutions. So, we'll see how the Chinese and Russian behavior plays out as they see an increasingly mad U.S. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's an interesting development. I mean, another advantage that Israel has consistently had is that its own allies, particularly the Americans, but also the Europeans, have been much more committed to Israel than the allies of its adversaries have been committed to them. I mean, you think, for example, of the Soviet role in the Middle East, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, more recently, the role of Russia and China with respect to Iran and so on. But what happened here is that the Bahrainis, who are now an elected member of the Security Council, put forward a draft resolution that essentially came down to an authorization to use force to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to free navigation. There were multiple objections to that, not only from the Russians and the Chinese, but also I think from the Pakistanis, the Colombians, and according to some reports, even from the French.
Mm-hmm.
And the resolution was watered down. It's no longer under Chapter 7. But at the end of the day, there was a real fear among the Russians and the Chinese, and also I think the Colombians and the Pakistanis who abstained, that it was open to too much interpretation and could, at the end of the day, if not vetoed, be used as a pretext to say that there is now international authorization for the use of force. And I think what played a key role here was Libya. If you remember, in 2011, the Russians allowed a Security Council resolution to pass that was all about protecting civilians or imposing a no-fly zone on Libya. And then that was immediately transformed into one that allowed for an unrestricted war against Libya and regime change and all the rest of it. And of course, no need to recall what has happened to Libya in the intervening decade and a half. And that really stung the Russians. They have consistently said that they were taken advantage of by the Americans, the British, and the French at that time. One could say they were naive and should have seen this coming. Be that as it may, they've decided not to fall into the same trap twice and preferred to err on the side of caution, as the saying goes, and veto this resolution. I think for the Chinese veto is very interesting because, like the Russians, they have very close relations, not only with the Iranians, but also with the Saudis, the Emiratis,
Right.
the Qataris, and so on. But they've basically seen this as a situation not of balancing relations with their various regional partners, but of the absolute necessity of preventing the U.S. from running amok and bringing the global economy to a standstill.
Yeah, no, so just to say the Chinese ambassador to the UN said that well, they don't condone the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and understand the concerns of the that are raised by the resolution's backers. I guess it's a nod to their allies in the Gulf. The draft fails to capture the root causes and full picture of the conflict and contains one-sided condemnation and pressure. So definitely interesting to see from them as they, and then, I would imagine if you're Russia and China, you're watching what's happening to Iran and you're assuming that some of these insane tactics will eventually be leveraged against you if the US continues to get away with this behavior. So, at some point, they're going to step in and do even the minimal, vetoing of a Security Council resolution, though I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. Mouin, while I still have you, I did want to ask you about a recent development that is incredibly concerning and I think very devastating. And that was this passage by the Israelis of this death penalty law that applies exclusively to Palestinians. And I'm sure everybody who watches this program probably saw the disgusting display by Ben-Gvir after this law was passed, where he was, opening a champagne bottle and drinking to it like a psychopath.
While wearing a noose on his lapel. Yeah.
Absolutely insane. This man, I mean, everybody likes to just say, oh, he's just on the fringes of Israeli society, but he's in charge of national security. Is that right?
He's the Minister of National Security, yes.
And he represents a growing strain in Israeli politics that is probably, you could say, the future of, whatever hell exists within the Israeli political spectrum that comes after Netanyahu. But all that's to say, you recently commented on that death penalty law. Why do you think this is being pushed now, and how dangerous is it?
Well, it's now basically the most racist law in the books on the planet, and South African activists have pointed out that even during the apartheid era in their country, there was never a similar law. This is a law that mandates the death penalty for so-called convicted terrorists, but exempts Israeli citizens and residents of the settlements from that punishment. So it's very clearly, it can only be applied to Arabs, Palestinians in this case. But of course, you've had all the Israel flunkies and apologists, what I call the Hasbara Symphony Orchestra, rushing to Israel's defense. You're acting like there's something, this is the only country on earth with a death penalty. No, this is racially motivated and will be racially applied. I have to say, it still needs to go to the Supreme Court. It may be struck down for any number of reasons. If it is, that will be, this is, at the end of the day, law does not operate in a vacuum, and it will be an indication that the political backlash to this law and fear of potential consequences outweighed the benefits. But the point I sought to make is that we should understand this law not really in the context of Israeli-Palestinian relations. I mean, Israel has had a policy of summary executions of wanted Palestinians for decades and has been applying it increasingly systematically. So if this was about suppressing Palestinian resistance, this law really has no added value unless you consider, hanging Palestinians as somehow having an added value in terms of intimidating them, which I don't think it will. I mean, you look at history, it usually has the opposite effect. Rather, I think we need to see this primarily in the context of Israeli domestic politics. There will be an election no later than October of this year in Israel. And the sponsors of this legislation, they come from the far right of the Israeli political spectrum, but that is increasingly becoming the center of the Israeli political spectrum because Israeli society as a whole is moving increasingly to the very far right. And they are hoping to generate electoral support. In other words, they are hoping to achieve electoral gain precisely by passing legislation that is racist, and precisely because it is meant to produce the death of more Arabs. And I think those calculations are essentially sound. I think those behind this legislation will get more votes, and will get more votes because they are passing racist laws that are meant to result in the execution of Arabs.
I mean, it speaks to a totally Nazified society, in my opinion. And I see, what they're doing in Lebanon with this, people are making these Anne Frank comparisons because you have the Israelis
Yeah.
saying, like, Lebanese Shias, they've displaced 600,000 of them from the south of Lebanon, and they're telling them that they can't return. And they're telling Christian and Druze villages in the south, they're calling up the local municipal leaders and telling them, if you give refuge to Lebanese Shias from neighboring villages, we will bomb you.
Yeah.
So everyone, people are making comparisons to, like, this is basically the Nazis coming after the Germans who are hiding Jews in their attics, which I think is a very apt comparison.
I grew up in the Netherlands, which is, of course, the country where Anne Frank lives. So this resonates very directly with her story. I mean, you have Israelis, as you mentioned, warning Lebanese Christians, warning Lebanese Druze that there will be severe consequences to pay, up to and including death, if they provide shelter to their Lebanese Shia compatriots. They're not even identifying them by their religion, but from this specific sect. They're not saying Muslims, they're saying Shia. And of course, they will throw up the Holocaust as a shield, but this is precisely what happened with Anne Frank. This is precisely what happened in Europe during the 1940s, where a specific group was being persecuted because of its identity, and others were warned that they will pay severe consequences if they give shelter or sustenance to any members of that group, not armed fighters, women, children, the elderly, disabled, whatever. If you are Shia and we find him in your house, we're going to bomb you.
So it's so insane. It's so insane. Now, I know I've taken an hour of your time and we've reached the end here. I so appreciate all of your analysis. But before you go, I just want to plug that you have just announced that you, or your publisher has just announced that you have written a book that's coming out. It's called Gaza Apocalypse, a Genocide Diary. Do you want to tell our audience a little bit about this book?
Well, it's basically a collection of essays I've written and in many cases published on social media and elsewhere, mainly since October 2023, with a long intro and conclusion slapped on it. And it should be out this summer.
Well, it's very exciting, and people can get it at OR Books, which
Correct.
is the publisher. We'll go back and put a link to this in the description of the show, and we can also hopefully get you back on to talk specifically about that book. But Mouin, I want to thank you for joining me for the hour. I want to remind our audience to make sure you hit the like button, and I guess we'll see what tomorrow brings. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.